Hello, I'm going to talk about the Harmonic Astrology of Claudius Ptolemy. If you are a student of astrology, the title of this presentation probably sounds crazy. Claudius Ptolemy did Harmonic Astrology. What? Yes, I am talking about the Claudius Ptolemy from the 2nd century AD who wrote the famous book, the Tetrabiblos. And it is, in fact, frequently overlooked that Ptolemy developed ideas in harmonic astrology, believe it or not. And that harmonic astrology did not begin with Johannes Kepler. I myself have often taught people that harmonic astrology started with Johannes Kepler when he introduced minor aspects. Well, of course, nobody thinks of things out of thin air with no heritage or history to it. But we did get the impression that that was relatively new with Kepler. Actually, he picked up directly from the ideas of Ptolemy. Okay. First, I'm going to read some quotes from Britannica.com. I have the specific website address at the bottom of this slide. And these are quotes from this website on 5 books that Ptolemy wrote. So at the top of the slide, it says his first major astronomical work, the Almagest, was completed about 150 CE. Okay, so the Almagest was one of Ptolemy's first works, and it's a book on astronomy. Then the next book they refer to in this website page is the Tetrabiblos. That's the one that we astrologers are extremely familiar with. The original title was Astrological Influences, and it comes in 4 volumes and later got renamed the Tetrabiblos. So that's what we are familiar with. Another book that Ptolemy wrote, I'll read the quote here from the website. Among Ptolemy's earliest treatises, the Harmonics, Investigative Musical Theory. Okay, so Ptolemy writes a book on harmonics. And in this book, Ptolemy discusses the relationship of music to astrology. I'll get into this in a little more detail in the next slides. And there are fundamental concepts in Ptolemy's book that later come up in harmonic astrology and what I call vibrational astrology. So I'll get into that in a minute. I just want to tell you about 2 other works that Ptolemy wrote. He also wrote a book called Optics, which is on visual perception. It only survives in, as it states here, mutilated medieval Latin translations of an Arabic translation, so we don't have a good original source of it. And another work from Ptolemy is his Guide to Geography, and Ptolemy's fame as a geographer is hardly less than his fame as an astronomer. So that's another important work of his. Okay, so I'm just putting this into context that of 5 major works done by Ptolemy, one of them is this treatise, the Harmonics. Okay, so a little bit of information about this work, Harmonics, by Ptolemy. This is from professors and students at the University of Chicago, and I've quoted here. I'm going to read a large part of this because it's stated so well, and I'll interject some of my own comments. So reading from the top here from this website page at the University of Chicago, Claudius Ptolemy's Harmonics was one of the most sophisticated works of music theory to survive from the Hellenistic world. In it, Ptolemy related musical harmonies to the properties of mathematical proportions derived from the productions of sounds themselves. Well, this is an idea, as you probably are familiar with, that is credited to Pythagoras hundreds of years earlier. I think Pythagoras was roughly 500 BC. So this is way earlier, 600 or 700 years earlier. Pythagoras is credited with noticing that the length of strings is related to their pitch and that there are proportions of the length of strings related to the pitch of sounds. But Ptolemy picks up on that idea and writes a sophisticated work on this. So, continuing with what it says here on this website page, those harmonies he considered to be distributed in all aspects of the physical universe. Now, this is where it ties into astrology, that this vibrations, sounds, are distributed in all aspects of the physical universe. In particular, they were in the phenomena of the planets and the human soul. So, Ptolemy is seeing vibration, sound, as reverberating throughout the entire physical universe and specifically in the planets and the human soul. It's a kind of music of the spheres. This is the conceptual framework for harmonic astrology, and it's clearly stated by Ptolemy. So, to go into this a little more detail in the second paragraph, Ptolemy argued that harmony was a kind of principle of activity or form reliant on the two highest senses, sight and hearing. Sight and hearing themselves generated two kinds of knowledge. Sight generated astronomy, since the heavenly bodies could be apprehended only through that sense. Well, let me stop here for a moment. What Ptolemy is saying is that our two of our five senses, sight and hearing, detect the nature of reality. One is visual, one is hearing, but it's the same reality perceived through two of our senses. Is this idea. There's a wholeness, there's a phenomenon out there that we receive through these two of our senses. We have three other senses for detecting other things. It's essentially the same thing. Sight is giving us the astronomy, and hearing produced the discipline of harmonics. In each case, the point of the enterprise was to perceive and understand beauty. So what Ptolemy is saying is that there is a beauty, there's a reality out there that's beautiful. We have these two different senses for understanding it. One sense gives us astronomy, the other gives us harmonics. They're really the same thing. So Ptolemy is going into some detail on exactly how this harmony of the spheres and how reality exists. It's almost like he has an intuition into what we now call superstring theory. Okay, to continue with this. And as the most nearly divine of natural entities in their respective realms, the soul and the heavenly bodies manifested and appreciate beauty to unusual degrees. That indeed was one of the insights that made astrology credible. Okay, this is sounding a lot like modern harmonic astrology and vibrational astrology. That astrology is based on vibration. It has this credible foundation to it. Or you might say, quote, scientific, unquote, kind of perspective. There's a reality behind astrology, and that reality is harmonics or vibration. Same thing we're saying today. So Ptolemy has put the conceptual framework clearly stated in his book. So last sentence here, so astronomy and harmonics were twin sciences, and it should not be surprising to find complementary characteristics in them. Okay, so he's into harmonic astrology. I mean, it's very clear. Now, another quote from this University of Chicago website. Ptolemy developed this argument into natural knowledge in a variety of ways. First, he imagined the musical scale extended along the zodiac with an octave covering half of the ecliptic circle. So, not only did Ptolemy have the theoretical framework for harmonic astrology, he starts working out some of the details of how it actually works, so that the zodiac is a musical scale, and we get an octave across 180 degrees, going halfway around the zodiac becomes an octave. So he's saying that the zodiac is vibrating. It's the same thing we say in vibrational astrology. I just didn't know that Ptolemy had already developed these ideas 2,000 years ago. I thought it came from John Addey, and Kepler, came up with his way of looking at it, built on vague ideas from a vague sense of music of the spheres. But actually this was worked out by Ptolemy in more detail than I had realized. Now, to continue with this quote here from this website page at the University of Chicago. So when two planets were in opposition, they formed an octave interval. Well, that's interesting because that's exactly how I teach the idea of hard aspects in vibrational astrology. So this idea that I thought I framed was already stated clearly by Ptolemy 2,000 years ago. Well, I didn't invent it, I adapted it from ideas I read in John Addey. And other aspects represented intervals correspondingly. He also advanced suggestions relating the motions of particular planets to changes in pitch, with lower pitches at rising and setting, and higher at planets' moments of greatest altitude. Now, here we see that Ptolemy had worked out some other ideas in what we could call harmonic astrology or vibrational astrology that we do not use today. He thought of the planets as they rise in the east and they reach their peak at the highest point that they reach, when they reach the midheaven, he thought of that as the pitch getting higher and higher. That's an idea we don't use, but it's an intriguing idea. So Ptolemy had worked out several concepts for how the planets are creating vibrations. Hints at a more detailed account of this correlation based on a division of motions into those in length, depth, and breadth were to be supplemented by a chapter devoted to the topic, but the chapter was lost. So we do not have the entire book Harmonics by Ptolemy. He tells us there's going to be another chapter that's going to go into more detail on length, depth, and breadth, and that chapter is gone. Oh no, so it's lost. We do know that Ptolemy proposed that the sizes of the planetary spheres were subject to harmonic principles too. So Ptolemy worked out several ways in which this music of the spheres operated and created astrological influences, we could call it. So finally, he related the astrological characteristics of the planets to their musical harmonies. So he's really intent on this idea that astrology is based on vibration through several different mechanisms, one of which is that you can take the zodiac circle and divide it into pieces to get these harmonic relationships, which is exactly what we do in harmonic astrology and vibrational astrology today. So because of the lost chapter in this work, we don't know all of Ptolemy's ideas. And as it's stated here at this University of Chicago website, Ptolemy's harmonic theory of the heavens is thus probably irrecoverable today. Well, his complete harmonic theory. Some of it is available, as I just described. It was irrecoverable too in Kepler's time. Now this I find interesting because as I was reading this, I was thinking to myself, well, Kepler pretty clearly must have known Ptolemy's work. Obviously he did. And probably directly felt he was building on Ptolemy's work. And that's what they say here at this website. Kepler became convinced that Ptolemy had envisaged at least a similar kind of argument to his own in the Harmonices Mundi, which is the work by Kepler, namely that harmonic principles were manifested in music in the heavens because they reflected deeper archetypal elements common to both and indeed to creation itself. So Kepler is building on the ideas of Ptolemy. Now, so what we find out is that Ptolemy is involved in what we could call harmonic astrology. And this is one of the reasons why in our software development we decided to cover all areas of astrology, because I felt it's artificial to divide astrology into Hellenistic, medieval, Vedic, modern psychological, as if they are completely separate or distinct areas. And in fact, the amount of overlap is huge. So we think of harmonic astrology as super modern. Some people say Kepler derailed the ancient tradition when he introduced minor aspects. Well, no, not at all. We can see that this is one of the important, vital traditions passed down from ancient times. So I think it's more realistic to think of astrology as having many simultaneous traditions going all the way back. So we're seeing harmonic astrology is an ancient tradition, developed and used by Ptolemy. It goes out of favor, kind of fades out, gets picked up again, and we can think of Kepler's work as a revival, as a new boost, a new awakening of the tradition that was always there. Okay, I also want to mention that other people have noticed the importance of geometry, proportion, vibrations in ancient astrology. For example, Naomi Bennett's book, Foundations of Astrology, is excellent in describing the importance of geometry and proportions like the golden ratio in ancient Egypt. So this information that there's an ancient tradition of understanding geometry and proportions like the golden ratio and the music of the spheres into ancient times is being uncovered by several people. Let me show you some websites. Here is, let's see, here is and Amazon.com, where you can go to order Naomi's book, Foundations of Astrology. Here are those other two websites I was talking about. Here's the one from the University of Chicago. Oops, let me drag this over here so you can see all this. And here's the Britannica.com website. Okay, but mainly I just wanted to show you at Amazon.com you can order this excellent book by Naomi Bennett. Okay, back to my PowerPoint. I'm basically done. That's it. On this last slide, I have some websites that I'm involved in. So that's it. What we have here, just to summarize, is that harmonic astrology, which was developed in modern times by John Addey. I further developed it into what we call vibrational astrology, and there are a handful of other astrologers doing it. Sometimes thought of as a modern invention, and then people noticed, well, Johannes Kepler introduced minor aspects, but it was looked at as a kind of vague, temporary little offshoot, like a little blip from the mainstream of astrological thought. Now we see that Claudius Ptolemy, who is kind of like a grandfather of astrology because his book Tetrabiblos became so important, translated so many times, so foundational, that even Ptolemy himself was deeply immersed in the concepts of what we now call harmonic astrology and vibrational astrology. So it's interesting just to be aware of it and to note that and to understand a little bit more about how we got where we are today. Thank you very much for listening, my friends. God bless. Namaste.